It was just past 8 a.m. when Jacob Walters burned his hand on the coffee pot for the third time that week. The old thing hissed in protest like it shared his frustration at life. With a sigh, he poured himself a cup anyway, eyes drifting to a hallway where a pink backpack leaned against the wall. On it was a keychain shaped like a globe. The colors faded from years of fidgeting fingers. That backpack had seen more airports than most adults, so had its owner. "Papa, do you know how to say sunshine in Korean?" A bright voice rang behind him. Jacob turned and grinned. "Not unless you count the way your smile lights up the room." Mila Walters giggled. She was 10 years old, loved breakfast cereal, and spoke 7 languages fluently. 7. Her favorite was Mandarin. "Taiyan," she said, proud as ever. "How do you do it, kid?" Jacob asked, pouring her a bowl of cereal. "You were barely speaking English at 2, and now you're teaching me Korean over frosted flakes." She shrugged like it was the most natural thing in the world. "People are just puzzles with different words, Papa. You have to listen before you talk." Jacob stared at her, humbled as always. He hadn't figured out life yet, just survival. Since his wife died 4 years ago, he'd done what he could. Moved to a smaller town, cut back on work hours, and most days relied on Mila's ability to charm the world into being kind to them. She had that rare effect on people, like sunshine actually. They didn't have much, barely made rent most months, but they had each other. Jacob worked at a small translation services company as an assistant project coordinator. The job was dull and thankless, but it gave him just enough to keep them afloat. Mila tagged along after school, was quietly sitting in the office corner with her books or listening to foreign language audio clips. Like they were bedtime stories, it was during one of those afternoons that everything changed. Jacob had brought Mila to the office on a Thursday when a storm delayed school pickup. She was sitting quietly, headphones on, mouthing foreign phrases while Jacob slogged through emails. He didn't notice when the company's CEO, Richard Halden, stormed into the room looking like he'd aged a decade in a day. "We're dead," Richard muttered, pacing the floor. "Sir?" Jacob looked up confused. "The Zurich deal. It's collapsing. The delegates from Tokyo and Abu Dhabi are here early. We don't have a certified interpreter for the meeting. They speak different dialects, and none of our contractors are picking up. We've got a room full of billionaires about to walk out because no one can talk to each other." Jacob swallowed. "Can't we? Too late. The meeting's in 15 minutes. We're about to lose a $50 million deal because of a language barrier." From the corner, a voice piped up. "What dialect?" They both turned. Mila had taken off her headphones. Richard blinked. "Excuse me? What dialect are the Japanese delegates speaking? The ones from Abu Dhabi, are they speaking Gulf Arabic or Modern Standard?" Jacob stood frozen. "It's Mila," but Richard looked intrigued. "You speak Japanese? Tokyo dialect? Also some Kansai." "I've been working on Keigo, the formal business style," Mila replied like she was discussing cartoons. Richard stared. "How old are you?" 10, she said, smiling, "but I listen really well." The next moments were a blur. Against all better judgment and, because he was desperate, Richard took Mila to the boardroom. Jacob's protests fell on deaf ears as the girl was handed a clipboard and an earpiece. She stood tall, shoulders squared like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Inside the glass-walled room, titans of industry sat stiffly, their expressions cold. Japanese executives looked frustrated, Emirati delegates were frowning. The Swiss representatives were already checking their watches. Then Mila spoke. First in, Japanese, soft, formal, respectful. The executives blinked. One of them smiled, turned to the Emeritus, and offered a warm greeting in fluent Arabic, adjusting her posture slightly. The way she'd seen their culture preferred, Jacob watched from outside, his heart pounding. This was either going to be a beautiful miracle or an international disaster. But it was. Would listen to sing listened. She caught the nuances, asked clarifying questions gently, and translated in real time without missing a beat. Not just the words, but the emotions behind them. Frustration turned to interest. Interest turned to engagement. By the time the hour was up, laughter filled the room. An hour later, the deal was signed. $50 million, saved by a 10-year-old girl in sneakers with a globe keychain. When Mila walked out of the boardroom, the entire office stood and applauded. Richard was teary-eyed. "You didn't just translate, kid," he whispered. "You brought people together." Jacob hugged his daughter tight, overwhelmed. "You okay, Bug?" She nodded. "They were just puzzles, Papa. I just helped them finish." That night, Jacob made pancakes for dinner, Mila's favorite. They danced in the tiny kitchen, singing songs in every language they knew. Outside, the storm had passed. But inside their little apartment, the world had changed. Not because of money, but because kindness had spoken louder than any translator ever could. The next morning, everything was different. Jacob didn't notice at first. He was too busy doing what he always did, burning his tongue on too hot coffee, mismatching socks, and trying to figure out if they had enough gas in the car to make it to school and work. Mila, however, sensed it. She felt it in the way their tiny apartment seemed unusually quiet, as if holding its breath before something big. "Papa," she said between bites of toast, "do you think I did something wrong?" "Yesterday." Jacob looked up, startled. "Wrong, Mila? You saved my boss's career and a deal worth more than we'll probably ever see in our lives. Why would you think that?" "I heard you on the phone late last night. You sounded worried." Jacob sighed. He had, in fact, been up talking to HR and legal for hours. There were policies, ethics, rules. Bringing a child into a business negotiation, even if it had worked, was raising red flags everywhere. But he smiled for her now. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby. You reminded people what understanding really looks like. That's never wrong." Still, he worried. When they arrived at the office later that day, the parking lot was full, too full. News vans. A crowd of people standing outside, some with cameras, others with signs. "Who are they?" Mila whispered, holding Jacob's hand tightly. He didn't know. Inside the building, things moved in a blur. Richard Halden was waiting in the lobby with a look somewhere between shock and giddy pride. "Jacob, Mila, come with me." They rode the elevator to the top floor. The door opened to applause. The entire board of directors stood waiting, and so did the CEO of the Japanese tech conglomerate and the Emirati investor who had once looked ready to walk out. They smiled when they saw Mila. Richard kneeled beside her and handed her a box. "Open it," he said gently. Inside was a crystal globe, etched with the words, "To the girl who taught us how to listen." Jacob blinked back tears. The next few days were a whirlwind. Local news picked up the story first. Then national outlets. Headlines blared. "Greater than young polyglot saves global deal. 10-year-old interpreter unites international leaders. A single dad's daughter is teaching the world a lesson in communication. Offers came flooding in language schools offering scholarships, universities sending invitations, even the UN reaching out to explore youth language initiatives." But through it all, Mila stayed grounded. She still asked for pancakes, still practiced with her headphones, still picked dandelions from the sidewalk cracks. One day, a woman named Dr. Rena Clark arrived at their door. She was head of an international nonprofit that helped refugee children adapt to new countries. She explained to Mila how some kids had lost everything: homes, families, even their ability to feel heard. "They speak different languages," Dr. Clark explained, "and sometimes they feel invisible." Mila nodded solemnly. A week later, Mila asked Jacob if she could do something important. That Saturday, she held her first free online class for refugee children around the world. She called it Words Without Borders. She taught simple phrases in multiple languages, sang songs, told stories, and most of all listened. The children lit up. Some of them smiled for the first time in weeks. Her class grew. Hundreds of families signed in from places like Jordan, Colombia, Germany, and Ethiopia. Kids who had felt like strangers in their new homes now had a friend, someone who spoke their language, sometimes literally, sometimes with just the right smile. Jacob sat behind the camera during those sessions, watching with awe. He thought of Mila's mother, gone too soon, and whispered a silent thank you into the ether. But what touched him most came a month later. It was a letter. No return address. Just a simple, creased piece of paper written in blocky handwriting. Greater than Dear Mila, I haven't spoken in weeks because I didn't know how. But today, when you sang in my language, I cried. Then I laughed. I told my mama I want to speak to people again. Thank you for finding my voice. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. That was the moment it hit Jacob. The $50 million deal. Impressive. But the real value priceless was how Mila reminded the world that being understood is a human need, not just a business strategy. Her gift wasn't just languages. It was empathy. It was seeing people when the world looked past them. Months later, Richard offered Jacob a promotion. Director of Cultural Liaison, he called it, and promised better hours, more flexibility, and full benefits. Jacob accepted not for the money, but because it meant more time with Mila and more opportunities to help others listen. Mila kept growing. By 11, she spoke 9 languages. But she never let it change her. She still wore the globe keychain, still sat at the park to talk to strangers, still said please and thank you in more ways than Jacob could count. Her 12th birthday, she gave a short speech at a charity gala, raising funds to provide language tools for refugee schools. Her last line brought the room to tears. Greater than people think, power is about money or titles or big offices. But I think it's about kindness, because when you really hear someone, you make them feel seen. And when people feel seen, they don't feel alone anymore. That night, as the stars blinked quietly above their apartment, Jacob tucked her in and sat beside her for a while. You know, he said, brushing her hair back, I used to think I was the one taking care of you. She smiled sleepily. You still do, Papa? Not really, he whispered. You saved the deal. You saved people. You're saving the world, Mila yawned. Nah, I just speak people. And with that, she drifted off to sleep, one hand resting gently on her globe keychain, as if to remind herself that the world was small enough to hold, kind enough to understand.